Good morning, everyone. I'm here with Andy Gibb. We're at beautiful Bisham Abbey. As you can see, it's an absolutely glorious day, and we're sat outside. It is 8:25 in the morning, and we're just about to run a safeguarding awareness course. But I want to steal a few minutes of Andy's time, because if you've read the blog post I put up on the 7th of June, I did a blog post about organisational abuse and physical intervention, and I thought I'd grab Andy and get his opinion on a couple of things. And the first thing, Andy, I want to get your opinion on is basically single-person restraint, things like basket dolls, that sort of stuff.
Right, yeah.
And the question I'm going to pose to you as a safeguarding expert in this field is, if an organisation is intentionally engaging in a system of intervention that relies on staff restraining children on their own, and these are children that will probably have challenging behaviour, so are vulnerable by nature, and they're allowing this system to continue and children are being hurt, would you say that that's an organisational failing from a safeguarding point of view?
From a safeguarding point of view, yes. Organisational abuse, which used to be called institutional abuse, so sometimes we see that mentioned when we say organisational and institutional. The premise of that, basically, to sum it up, would be poor practice and not looking at progressing the practices, not responding to highlighted reports, concerns, government advice to do with restraining, and if we're on about children at the moment, but if we're restraining children, and we're saying we're going to do it as a one-person restraint. From my point of view, from safeguarding, that's a significant concern to me, because the risk of allegations, even with the best intention, if you were taught this technique and you did it, and there's an allegation made by a child, you're leaving yourself at risk. You're becoming an individual at risk yourself.
We're talking about the member of staff, yeah?
Yeah, we're talking about member of staff.
We'll actually highlight a case. I can't say too much about it because I'm involved in it. I'm going to court as an expert witness on this later on this year. And this happens all the time, so I'll generalise it. School has adopted a system of intervention which involves staff having to restrain or being taught to restrain children on their own. The staff member goes and does that, and then there's a complaint made by a pupil or a couple of pupils. The three other staff, by the way, who saw it, said it was absolutely fine. But he's now been disciplined and sacked on the grounds of gross misconduct because he used a single-person restraint, and there was an argument over the fact that it was inappropriate physical restraint, which it falls into one of the categories of safeguarding, isn't it?
Yeah, it would do.
So how does the school get away with implementing that system and then hanging their staff out to dry?
I mean, obviously, it's hard to comment on without seeing the facts or looking at the case notes. But it's a perfect example where it leaves you to the interpretation of others, is that you can be taught a technique if it's a single-person technique. And if we're on about certain techniques which is single-person restraint, the risk there is how it's perceived, especially because what you're doing there is exposing the child to numerous amounts of potential abuse. I mean, for me there, initially, we're looking at emotional abuse of the child. If that child is struggling and the technique is a single-person technique, the risk there was that the child might become very extremely distressed and then make an allegation, a true allegation in some cases, against that single member of staff. But the risk there is that if the schools commissioned the training, the schools ticked it off, said it's fine, they've done the due diligence and they're happy with it, then to discipline a teacher for doing that technique, it sounds a very interesting case.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's correct. Like I said, I can't talk too much about it. It's kind of cool. But, it raises the other thing here about single-person restraint, because it happens a lot in education. Now, you and I work in the NHS, we work with healthcare providers, we work in the care sector, and I even work with security agencies. And nowhere else do they advocate the use of a single-person restraint. I mean, they do many years ago, but not now. So when we're training in these other areas, it's always a minimum of 2 or a team of 3. But in education, they still seem to allow this single-person thing to go on, which for me, from a health and safety point of view, is a lone working activity anyway, so there's a whole raft of legislation and regulation you've got to comply with. But again, I'm just wondering how this crosses over from a safeguarding point of view. Why is it happening in schools?
Yeah, it's almost in disbelief. It's one of those pending cases. It's inevitable. Well, if we look at organisational abuse and we see it from a safeguarding issue, and you mentioned health and safety, you'll be aware as I am to do with when we look at corporate manslaughter. If we're dealing with a child in a method where it's a one-on-one situation, and obviously all the heightened concerns to do with that and the struggling child, it'd be nice to see that it follows the path of care, where care is seen right, we will reduce that because we won't do it because it's too dangerous. But we still do it with the most vulnerable people in our community, children.